Hello and welcome to another episode of me painting again. Oh yeah, we're painting again. I accidentally didn't have my microphone plugged in, so I'm doing a voiceover for this one. So it might sound a bit different. You don't get the painting sounds, which is a shame. But anyway, I'm mixing up some burnt umber and ultramarine blue to create a sky. So I want a nice dark sky on here, and the idea is if I have a nice dark background, then it'll make it easier for the mountain to show in the end of the painting, because this is what I want to do, is create a scene where there's a nice mountain showing in front. So I'm just putting on the mix of burnt umber and ultramarine, just throwing it on there really. Keep going back and forth, mixing the paint, and there we go. Try and show it as much as I can. Sometimes you forget when you're painting, and every now and then I'll drop into a little bit of water, and just to make the paint move a little bit better, make that paint smooth. And it goes on quite nice on these pages. I didn't actually realise, but I was painting on a page that I usually put in between pages. And I just started painting away, not really thinking about it, and then I noticed it, and I was like, oh, I'm painting on the page that I put in between, but it didn't really matter. The paint goes really well on these sketchbooks. Well, they're actually scrapbooks, but I like the mid-tone colour of the paper. It's almost like using a canvas that you've toned. It's the same idea really. So I'm just blocking in a greyish colour using a Da Vinci Fit synthetic brush. I just mentioned that. Because I did a video on it, because I was out painting. Well, I say I was out painting, I wanted to go out painting, but I forgot my brushes. I had my paints and my water and no brush, and I went in this art shop, and I really wanted some cheapy brushes, but I ended up getting this one, and it's quite a good brush really. I do quite like it. Just fill in that base part as well. Get the whole thing covered. Basically, you're painting a rectangle. You could probably do that with a bigger brush, really. I'm so used to using one or two brushes these days. I just stick with that. I don't tend to go between brushes. I know when you first start painting you think, oh, I need a brush for this, a brush for trees, a brush for clouds, a brush for softening. You think you need so many brushes, but you really don't need many. So there's my palette of colours. Some cadmium yellow, yellow ochre, sap green, alizarin crimson, ultramarine blue, burnt umber and titanium white. And not many colours really. I put in my cad yellow for a bit of brightness. I'm making a mountain mix now using some ultramarine blue, burnt umber and alizarin crimson. I'll make a nice mountain mix. I wanted it a bit bluer. So you can make your choice. You could make it bluer, browner, or a bit redder, or greener. Whatever you want to do really. Whatever mood you're in. If you're in the mood for something a little bit warmer, maybe a bit more red. If you want somewhat cooler, maybe more blue, more brown, to dull it, darker. So I've got my little spritzer to keep the paints moist from drying out. It's a good thing to use actually, to keep your paints wet. So I'm just going in for the dark area. I have got some reference, but I don't use it. I use it as a basic, very, very basic guide. I tend to do that a lot with reference. Photos that I've taken, I use them as a starting point, but not as a finishing point. Unless I'm doing an exact copy. So I'll put some green in my colour. Just as I'm starting to develop the area of the bottom part of the mountain and the hills in front. Because I was umming and ahhing a bit on whether I was going to have snowy hills. Even in the reference picture, the hills are a bit grassy and the mountain's got snow on it. But I always think, should I do it that way or not? A little bit of yellow ochre in there, just to add a little bit of light, get the shape. So I tend to keep things dull to start with. I try and keep everything dull so I can add the light afterwards. And I find that works well for me. It's just a system that I like. I don't always go by it exactly, but mostly I try and keep the highlights till the end, because they're the most fun things to do. And it becomes an exciting time to put in the highlights. Just showing it, because when the water's wet, the paint's wet, it does shine back a little bit, so I try and tilt the page now and then, just so you can see it better. So I'm just looking at the mountain shape, like what kind of shape do I want it, because the actual mountain I was looking at in the picture that I took years ago was flat. But I wanted it to be more dramatic, so I began my creation. Building the mountain. I wanted a good size. So I'm just mixing up more colour, brown, blue, crimson, to get my mountain mix. And then there we go, showing it, moving on to the white now, the highlight, bit of blue, bit of white. So I don't do the lightest light straight away either. So even when I'm thinking of the lights, I'm thinking how to dull it as well. Blues, browns, bit of the mountain mix, white. And start building this mountain up. So I still haven't worked out the shape of the mountain yet. I'm still building it up. I'm quite light pressured even when I'm using a brush. I don't press that hard when I'm using my brush really. I think because I've got quite a few years of painting in oils. When I paint in acrylics I paint similar. I'm quite light-handed with my paints. Heavy-handed when you need to be, but light-handed as soon as you start doing detail, that's it. Or when you're really focused, light pressure I do. Bit more blue in there, dulling it. Still working on that shape. Thinking about the shape of the mountain. I started to think higher. I'd like a peak to this mountain. Looking at the darks and sort of getting rid of some of them. Thinking about how I'm going to get this to contrast well. And then changing the shape of the mountain. Getting that rounded edge there. And I'm thinking about the light. Where's the light coming from as well? and you can kind of do the whole painting before putting the lightest light in, so you can do it as like an overcast day almost, and then put the light in afterwards, so then the sun's come out. Mixing up a green colour, bit of blue, bit of green, bit of yellow ochre, just to make it a little bit. It's more of a brown when you look at it, a yellowy brown. There we go. It's starting to get some sort of a colour in that. Bit of blue in there, bit of yellow, bit of green. See, I don't want it a bit too bright, so I'm always dulling it. Always dulling that colour. I'm just looking at where the light would hit some of these shapes. But it's still going to be quite dull. I mean, I'm not really worried too much about it. I just want to break it up, get them shapes, and not work too hard on it, because it's not an important part of the painting. It's a part of the painting, but it's not the star of the painting. That's the mountain mainly, and a tree. You'll see as the painting progresses. Just using my finger to soften edges. There we go. Give you an idea. There is a nice light, a triangular kind of light on the grass, which I want to put in as well. And then I've got this foreground, which is sort of old grassy sort of area, bit dried out, bit of a reddish look to it, and very loosely gonna just throw some colour in front of a wall. There's a wall behind that, which I'm gonna put in as well, but I'm just filling this colour in. See, I do all this stuff while other areas are drying. I grab some sap green as well, just threw that in with it, just to mix the colours up a bit. I don't want the colours to be separate. I want colour mixed in with colour, greens next to reds and things, and then shapes. But again, even this area it's not that important, so it's not an area I'm going to do huge detail in. So I'm just adding some more greens and browns. I go into a little bit of blue and throw some of that in there. It's all wet, so it kind of mixes together nicely. Just to get my base colour really, and then as it dries you can start adding more. A bit more of the green. It's different as that colour is. Once the green's on, it kind of like the red and the green together, it all starts getting neutralised a bit actually. I start dulling it a bit, and as it dries it dulls a bit. Now I'm mixing up a dark. I used blue, brown and a little bit of red for the wall that's behind, and it sort of pokes through a bit behind the grass. It's on the other side of the hill. So I'm painting this wall in, and I haven't even done the grass behind it. So some people would think that you always have to paint in order, like paint the grass, then paint the wall in front of that, and you can kind of do, but you can easily fix stuff. I think that's why I'm not really that fussed what order I do stuff in, especially with acrylics, because they dry so fast. you can just fix things. I just grabbed a little bit of green and yellow and just threw that in, because they are like stones piled up, and just tap it. Just taps it away. I'm looking at the that gap now. I'm thinking about the green that I want to put in. The foreground is drying slowly. And there's the wall. You can see it a bit better there. I'm looking at the mountain. I'm going to highlight that with some yellow ochre and crimson and white. Just blobbing into a little bit of yellow ochre, a little bit of a alizarin crimson, and then some titanium white, and then bringing that together for my highlight for the corner of the side of the mountain, I should say. A bit more yellow ochre, just to warm it up a bit. So I'm thinking about the light coming from one side, and here we go. I can lightly put in where the light's hitting. Bit of that light pressure again. You do get a bit of paint breaking when you light pressure in with your brush. You get a bit of light pressure and you can pull the paint. You do get the paint breaking. It does work quite well. Depends on what kind of effect you want to do, really. So I'm thinking about the light hitting some of these areas. Thinking about how dark or how light I want things to be. I think this is where a lot of practice comes in handy, because I'm making this up and just thinking about it, but when you've painted a few, you start learning how light affects things, and it gets a bit easier. I think practice is the key to everything, isn't it? So I'll get in some blue. I think practice and knowledge together though. So hopefully these videos help you out a little bit and get you going to practice. Just pulling that paint down with my finger. I was getting rid of some of that white and turning it into a cooler blue, just because of where the light should be hitting. Looking at it, I could have bent the light around a bit more, but I quite like it. I decide I want the shadow side of the mountain to be darker, so I mix a darker colour. It's kind of a watery colour at the moment, and I'm kind of random with my strokes just to make these different changes in the rock formation. So I'm just adding more dark, deepening the darks a little bit. And as it dries, it gets a bit darker, and then I start coming in with a bit more. Just in areas that I want it to be a bit darker. Just throwing that in, using my finger to smudge it. And then going back into some more colour. And a bit more light. So I'm kind of breaking up the dark with light. Breaking the dark up, breaking the light up. Back and forth. It's a lot of back and forth until you get to a point that you really like it and you think, oh, that'll do. Oh yeah, I thought I'll put another mountain behind this one, but I'll be very subtle about it. A little bit of colour. And it's quite watery, so it was going to fade a bit. I just thought it would look quite good with another mountain there, a distant one. I like using the acrylics a bit like watercolours because you can use them like watercolours and also a bit like oils at the same time, and I quite like that. You can use two techniques in one then. So I decided to get a bit more light and just to lighten some areas a touch more. I'm still umming about stretching it round and I tap it away a little bit. But it's starting to get some good lighting effect now. And then on this one side, I'm thinking about the light coming, thinking where it's going to hit, so I'm going to just add a bit more to these, just a bit more, not a massive amount. I mean, when a lot of this dries, it kind of disappears a bit. You don't really see a great deal, but it just adds something. So there's a little bit of the yellow ochre in with the sap green and a bit of brown, just to add them little bits more, a little bit more. Now some really strong light green, some yellow ochre, sap green, cadmium yellow, just to make a brighter green where there's this almost triangular of light hitting down here. So you've got the dull sky and then these pockets of light that break things up, that add light onto the mountain and then light onto the grass. So I went a little bit darker in one area and lighter in the other. So yeah, you get it's a nice triangle of light. I do like that. As I'm using my greens and stuff, I just throw a bit more in there. Now, just mix in sort of a a blue, just to mist that up. So like a white and blue, and I just throw it on quite thin, and I just use it for mist. Some areas where I don't want it to be too dark, I just lighten it a little bit, just soften it. I got some bit of white and yellow ochre. I'm going to throw in some grass indications, although I put them in way too bright there, so I go back and dull them later. Bit of yellow ochre. You see, I find if your paint's quite thin with acrylics on acrylic, then it just sort of almost disappears a little bit as it dries, because the water vanishes and you've spread the paint out a little bit. But if you using a lot of paint, thick paint, it's not going to do that, so that's something to think about as well, actually, when you're putting your paint on. If you want it to stand out and stay where it is, you put it on really thick, and if you want it to fade away a little bit, you put it on thinner, like watercolour. I actually paint this exact way when I paint outside as well, plein air. I use gouache as like a watercolour. So I'm just putting in this tree. There's a tree there. I just made a dark using some burnt umber and some sap green and ultramarine blue and alizarin crimson. I put a shadow under it as well. A bit more blue in it, look, just to cool it down a bit. And if you want that to be really dark, you want the paint to be thick. So when it dries thick and dark. So my painting style is quite painterly still. Even though I try and control it a little bit, it does come out quite painterly, and that's just my natural style. And you find that your style of painting is the way you like painting, and that becomes your style of painting. The way you hold the brush, the way you put the paint on, the colours you use, all that sort of thing. Just softening the edge. Don't want it to be a hard edge. And put a little bit more of that paint on there. Strengthen that line. Move the shadow a bit. And soften it and just smooth it a little bit. And then highlight some of the wall where you think the light's gonna just zing along that triangle, and maybe it's gonna hit some of that wall. Highlight a little bit of that. Give that a bit more interest. Bit more colour. Just putting a little bit more here and there. Sort of more instinctive painting, I would say. I don't know, that makes me sound a bit better than I am, but you just like looking at areas where you want to put certain colour. That's what I was doing. I was thinking, oh, I want a little bit more yellow ochre colour there and a little bit more of something else there. That's all it was really. But it's interesting, that tree's almost pointing at the mountain, isn't it? I kind of like that. And then you've got the angle of the wall, and then I'm going to show a dry image afterwards, but I thought I'd just put in a few little lines and stuff to indicate grassy areas, because that has got some like dry grass and stuff growing in amongst it, so I thought I'd put a few lines in, bit of detail. I didn't want to do too much detail, just a bit. So yeah, I'm almost fighting with the detail. I start using my finger to smudge it away a bit. I just want a little bit. A little bit more light on that wall in places, just to make it look a bit better. Just separate it, and this is a bit faded down the bottom, so I need that a bit darker for that part of the wall. I just put a bit of light on it first. No, decide, yeah, let's darken that bit up a bit. Bit of blue and red, brown, get that colour back. Use my finger just to smudge it together. Smudge the colours together really. Okay, so we'll have a look at the finished painting, and there we go. So I quite like this actually. I quite like the light of it. I really like painting light. It's really enjoyable. So I hope you enjoyed this one. Thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you at another one. Cheers, bye.